This panel session actually grew out of a couple of suggestions, one from Jim Wilsey and the other from Susan Trausch, who suggested, first of all, that we have sort of generations of Knight Fellows, PJFs and Knight Fellows through the years, and how the impact of the fellowship on their career. And then also catching people at various stages in their career. So we took that idea and ran with it, and we have a panel of fellows from the 60s and 70s, from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. One change is that the moderator, Bill Gannon, was going to moderate this, representing the 90s. He was class of 1997, and because of a family emergency, he had to bow out, and so we asked Sally Lehrman to step in. Her bio is not in the printed program, but it's in the online program. Because of that, let me just tell you a little bit about her. She was a fellow in 1996. She's an accomplished reporter and writer, particularly in medical and science reporting, and she's just completing a 5-year term at Santa Clara University as the Knight Ridder San Jose Mercury News Endowed Chair in Journalism in the Public Interest. Even just think about a Knight Ridder chair is sort of an odd thing, isn't it? Because she is now representing the 90s, I'm going to ask her to sort of tackle the topic that everybody is first, and then she'll introduce the other panel members, and we'll proceed. Sally?
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for being here. It is such a delight for me to be able to be moderating today, because I'm just really honored to share the stage with people I admire and to an audience of people whom I also admire. And kind of getting to this idea of what does the Knight Fellowship mean to me and how has it affected my life. For me now, the Knight Fellowship really is a community of people who share my passion for journalism and its importance to a free society. People who I know I can count on, and people who I know are top in the field. And whatever your year, whatever your journalistic, whatever your year, you were selected for your journalistic chops, for your passion for journalism, for your leadership and your potential. And everybody here, I know, because I know a lot of you, have taken up that opportunity and that challenge in so many ways. You've gone on to do great work, to contribute to the standards and the quality of journalism, and you've also gone on to reinvent journalism. And for me, I think just more specifically the way the fellowship affected me, it gave me a foundation to do some of those things, kind of empowered me to go out and strengthen myself as the activist that I always had been for better journalism. More in terms of how it affected the journalism I do, I still see it reverberating today in the very stories I choose and the way I do those stories. So, and it's been 18 years. So right now, well, let me tell you a story first. My husband, his name is Tom, he loves to tease me. Whenever we go on a hike or we go on a trip somewhere, I always want to go a little bit further than everybody else. And it's because I want to see what's around the corner. And I think the fellowship is partly why I want to see what's around the corner, and it also helped me do a better job of seeing what's around the corner. And not only that, but what are the things that led us to this place. And so right now I'm working on a book for Oxford University Press. As an example, it's called Skin Deep, and it's about the effort to use new biomedical tools to understand and address health disparities. That is, the higher rates of chronic disease and earlier mortality among non-white people. So I work with both those ideas and both those tools in this book. I'm asking how are century-old ideas about natural difference re-emerging in this new research? And I'm also exploring new discoveries that social inequalities may actually embed themselves quite directly in our bodies. So the answer to health inequities may in fact be in addressing the social inequalities, the social structures that shape our bodies. So to me, it stems directly out of some courses I took and helps me see and think about what's around the corner. So with that, let me introduce my fellow panelists here who really exemplify the transformative power of a Knight Fellowship in a variety of ways. And what we're going to do is, we'll go chronologically through the years, and I'll introduce each one, and then they'll tell you a little bit about, I guess, what was around the corner for them after the Knight Fellowship. So we're going to start with Peter Sussman, on my right. Peter Sussman spent his career as an editor at the San Francisco Chronicle. He remains a vocal authority and advocate on issues of journalism, from freedom of information, diversity, ethics, and especially news media access inside prisons. He helped write that well-regarded and often used Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, among other activities. And his most recent book is Decca, The Letters of Jessica Mitford. Peter was a professional journalism fellow at Stanford in 1978 and 79. So Peter.
Thank you. And thank you for putting in the 19 too. It's no longer enough to say 78, 79. So yeah, am I the earliest one on this panel? Is that right? No one from the 60s. Oh dear.
Yeah, you're the earliest.
I want to say, first of all, that I'm thrilled that Sally is moderating. We have worked together on a number of issues over the years, especially in journalism, politics, and diversity, and so forth. And there can be no greater advertisement for what can happen as a result of this program than the work Sally has done, which is just phenomenal. I think what happened to me in this fellowship was that it actually made me a journalist. I remember before I got the fellowship, when people asked me what I did for a living, I used to say I worked for the Chronicle. Afterwards, when they said, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I'm a journalist." And I really believe that the transformation took place while I was here. That you can get I was on the news desk at the Chronicle, and I was sort of where the whole thing came together. I actually, it was very instructive. I asked Dawn if she could find my original application. First I looked on my computer, and then I realized I didn't have a computer in 1978. And then I couldn't find it in my files. So she gave me a printout of the application, and I could get a sense of what I was doing at the time, which is that I was certainly trying to do the best I could to reflect my world and reflect a little broader world than was traditional in journalism. But I was balancing that against deadline pressures. I was right in the center of it on the news desk, choosing stories, deciding how long they would be, deciding what play they'd get, drawing out the pages, deciding what pictures to run. It was all done by one person then. That's now 5 specialties, I think. And you really do have to balance what you're doing with what the purpose is of what you're doing. You know, what the purpose is of what the role is supposed to be doing. And so what Stanford gave me the opportunity to do is to stand outside the production end and to look a little more broadly at the liberal arts, at how we think and read our culture. And as I look at the achievements afterwards, I realized that many of those things would not have been something that came up for me in the traditional kind of journalism I practiced beforehand. That is, I think I've tended more toward untraditional sources and forms of journalism. I worked for years with publishing the work of a prison writer. He had never published before. He was at a federal prison. He was a bank robber and a lifelong heroin addict, but a terrific writer who really understood the dynamics of prison. He didn't always understand what people out here wanted to know about prisons, But he started a correspondence with me in conjunction with this after I published his first piece, which was the first piece written, I believe, on AIDS in prison in the mid-'80s. At that time, no one was aware of the fact, or was thinking about the fact that all the risk factors are present in prison, from homosexual sex to needles to unprotected sex, everything, and shared needles. And 6 months later, Newsweek did a cover piece. But the first piece he submitted to me was on AIDS in prison. He'd never written before. We ultimately went on to, through years of publishing his insider's view of prison, always acknowledging that this was not a news story, this was a view from a prison cell. And then he was punished for it after 2 years, which got me very involved in journalism access to prisons and many associated issues. And ultimately, we did a book together called Committing Journalism. And then another major involvement was with the ethics issues that I dealt with as head of the Northern California Society of Professional Journalists, and ultimately objecting to an ethics code that was presented by the national SPJ, which was deeply flawed and which I managed to get defeated, and then they brought me into the process of writing a new one. So, and I had no experience. Now, let me make clear also that I did not go to journalism school. I'm not sure if that would have changed anything, but I certainly got a broader view of what journalism could be and how to think about the issues that we were reporting on through this program, no question about it. And a number of other similar involvements in diversity education, diversity both in coverage and in hiring, and other issues in which I became a major advocate, freedom of information. And I really believe that it was the immersion, it was the awareness that I was a journalist. I had studied liberal arts in college, but it was the awareness that I was a journalist while I was studying the liberal arts here that allowed me to think of it in a broader way, think about what I was doing. In essence, even poetry teaches you how to read a culture and how to communicate that. And what I think I did here was think a lot about how to read a culture, starting with the arts, starting with the at the ground floor. And I think I came out with a broader sense of both journalism and what it could accomplish. Among the other book I wrote was with Jessica Mitford, who is often called a journalist, but there can be no more untraditional journalist than Jessica Mitford. She was called, Time Magazine called her the queen of the muckrakers. She wrote The American Way of Death. A lot of people don't remember her, but and she did a lot of it through ridicule or through other means that managed to unearth the craziness of the funeral industry and other industries in ways that no one who did journalism in a traditional way could have. Very well known in her time, and I think my involvement with her over the years, and by the way, we also met with her during my fellowship year. We went up to Oakland to her house and spent an afternoon in her home, which is a few blocks from where I live. And the ethics part, I think, was the application of some of these broader questions to the actual daily practice of journalism. How do we conceive of ourselves and our role? And I don't think I would ever have got involved in that without the kind of background that Stanford provided. And the other part was one that Sally mentioned, that I recognized there was a community of journalists around the world and around this country sitting here today who share some of these same values and who were both resources and encouragers, and that there was some validity to the way I was feeling about journalism and how it was wrongly practiced when I was there. I felt I was living in a world of press releases and of police beats and of traditional kind of mechanics of putting together a newspaper without enough thought devoted to the larger context of what we should be doing and how we could do it. So that's a rough.
Thanks,
yeah.
Peter. I think that's a great overview of application within one's own career and in a broader way of thinking about journalism. And I love that phrase, committing journalism. I use that all the time. I'm out committing journalism.
Can I say one thing the origins of the phrase were from the prisoner Danny Martin, who was asked after he was punished for writing for me. He was transferred to another prison, and I did my best to make it known that he was transferred for retaliation for an article he wrote. And so the press was lined up when he arrived at the new prison. They were trying to hide him. And the first interview he gave, he was asked, "What right do you have to write for a newspaper? You're a bank robber." And he said, "I committed bank robbery and they put me in prison, and that was right. And then I committed journalism and they put me in the hole, and that was wrong."
Wow, thank you.
That's where the phrase came from.
Thank you, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Peter. So I want to say, too, I'm just giving you a little taste of everyone's background, and everyone's full bio is in the program. So I hope you'll take a look. And also, just about format, what we'll be doing is, I'll introduce each person, and they'll answer that first question. Then I have another follow-up, and then, of course, I hope you'll have all kinds of questions to follow up with. I know you will. So our next speaker is Rita Williams, a television journalist in the San Francisco Bay Area for 41 years, who recently retired from KTVU TV, where she spent the last 35 years. She started the station's San Francisco bureau in 1980, and as its bureau chief, covered politics and the law, investigations, and top stories, including the 1978 assassinations of Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk. Honors in her career include the Peabody Award and the Society of Professional Journalists James Madison Award, which is given for efforts in freedom of information. She was a professional journalism fellow at Stanford in 1985-86. So Rita, can you give us a little taste of how the fellowship affected your life and career?
Actually, I wasn't a professional journalism fellow. By 85, 86, we were Knight Fellows. So I'm the dividing line here.
Okay, thanks for the correction.
But as for the impact the fellowship had on my life, obviously, like many of you, it was profound, but perhaps unlike some of you, I'm reminded of it every single day. And in this clip that we'll play now, you'll see why.
We have some great news tonight. There's a new addition to the 10 o'clock news family. Our reporter Rita Williams gave birth to her very first baby just before midnight last night. It's a boy, a very big boy, 21 inches long and 8 pounds, 11 and a half ounces. So far, Rita and her husband Lindsay haven't picked a name for the baby, but at 8 pounds, 11 and a half ounces, we suggest Bubba. Rita, Lindsay, congratulations, that's one beautiful baby.
Now, I did that. Thank you. My proudest achievement. But I picked that little clip, one, as a TV person to show you a little bit of television, but two, just a little humor here and the different ways the fellowship impacted us all. You'll be happy to know that that baby boy was not named Bubba. He's today 26 years old, and that's why I say I'm reminded every day, and I'll tell you why. He's in his third year of law school at UC Hastings, and it was not only a first for me and my husband Lindsay back here in the red shirt, but it turned out it was a first for the fellowship program, or at least so says Harry Press. Harry proclaimed as I got pregnant my fellowship year, yes, I got pregnant while I was here. After many years of trying, it happened. And Harry always said I was the first fellow to get pregnant here at Stanford. There had been spouses of fellows. If anybody can contradict that, please do so. But that was Harry's story anyway, when he and Martha gave us a baby shower before we left. He said, as I said, spouses had gotten pregnant, but no actual fellow. And perhaps that was in part because there weren't as many women back there in those huge numbers like there were men before 85, 86. So we had a lot of idle time, my husband and I, and we used it wisely. As for other things about the fellowship year, when we started that year, one of the speakers who came to talk to my class was John Jacobs, the late John Jacobs from the Sacramento Bee, political reporter. And I remember this so well as if it were yesterday. John said, the fellowship year is sort of like gnawing on a steak bone. Now think about that for a minute. You eat the steak, it tastes good, but you don't have that time to really think about it and to enjoy it with great time. And I've always thought about that ever since, as I always think about John. All of you have been here at Stanford, so I didn't want to talk about what the year itself did or what I took or how it impacted me later. But, and you heard last night in my remarks at Harry Press's memorial service that it took me 2 tries. So you already know that about how I got here. But let me talk more about the impact after I left Stanford. Not only did I go back to work with a swollen belly, 6 months pregnant, but I think I returned, like most of you, reinvigorated and ready to do great journalism. As one of the few TV journalists in the program, and several of us have gotten together here, back then we considered ourselves tokens, which they always corrected us and said that was not true, Jim always said, and Harry. But to be a TV journalist and a woman in the program, it really validated for me that I was worthy and that I was a journalist, sort of what Peter said. That word journalist. I had been fighting since the early 70s, and it may seem comical now when you turn on a television set and you see so many women doing news. But remember, in the early 70s, when I started out, there were mostly old, white, fat men that were on television, truly. And I remember some of the first interviews that I had. One of the news directors said, well, if I hire you, what are you going to do after 40? And I said, why? Why would you ask that question? And he said, well, no audience is going to allow women to age on the air. Plus, they also said we had no sense of authority in our voices, and men would never accept us delivering hard news. So I just retired. Let me tell you, I'm 66. So I beat him out by 26 years. And we showed that audiences would indeed let women age on the air and that we could do a damn good job. My paper, as Peter was talking about, my paper was on ethics, something very important to me in journalism back then and still is today. But I had gotten, when I came here, somewhat disillusioned with journalism. I was upset by some of the struggles we went through, and especially as women, and not being paid as much, not being accepted, some of the backbiting and the jealousies, and probably would have dropped out of journalism had I not gotten that fellowship. Of course, when I went back, those were still there, but they didn't bother me as much. And I think I had that inner confidence, and I think we all know as journalists how important that is. Because we have to go toe-to-toe with the president or politicians or other newsmakers, and we have to ferret out dirt.
Or editors.
And editors. And sometimes with camera people, too. But it was really important to have that confidence that I gained here at Stanford and feel like continues to grow here. I also taught here for a semester several years later, and that helped as well. But one of the things that several of you have talked about is that we found out that there was this wide group of other journalists that were wonderful all over the world. And in my class, when I had an ethical issue, I didn't ask someone in my station. And one quick example was I had a couple of great sources that told me about a well-known politician who's still alive, who was HIV positive. And my news director wanted me to break that story. And I had misgivings about it because he was, yes, very conservative, but he had in office always funded HIV and AIDS programs. He was not a hypocrite, and it just didn't seem right to invade his personal life to me. So I bounced it off a couple of fellows, and they all agreed with me. And I went back to my news director and said my sources really weren't that good, and I just didn't feel comfortable yet. And that story, to this day, has never broken. Anyway, that's an example of how fellows continued to help me through the years. And let me just say, I was very privileged for, what now, Jim, 30 years now, to help in some way, not 30, 20, 25, to help in some way the selection process of all of you who've come since then. Now, you may not know me, and that's great, but a lot of you, I've read your applications, and I've seen what you've done. And even though that was a lot of extra work when you're working full-time, I love that period every year. I looked forward to getting that packet from Stanford because it was sort of like having a mini fellowship. It reinvigorated me again to see what great work all of you, and I still get emotional about this because of where we're going in journalism, but to see that you're doing extraordinary work, and that would make me go back to what I had to do and to try to do it better. This is what I laughingly call show and tell. I speak to a lot of schools and high schools and things, and these are just to be funny, but show and tell, Peabody. I got external awards, but the really good ones were the internal awards that you got. And there are several up here. We can just stick them up here. Bling is good. And if you want to come up at the end, like the high school students do, and have your picture made with them. Nice. And you remember when you see on TV when somebody gets an Emmy and they go, oh God, it's so heavy. It is heavy, so you can come try it out. The Peabody, which for TV people, for all you print folks, it's like a Pulitzer for us. And it is probably the least exciting looking, but it means an awful lot. Let me just finish up here that I think in part because of the fellowship, I've learned to live each day and do each story as if it were my last. Because, as Hunter S. Thompson said in this quote that I read at Harry Press's memorial service, and I love this, life's journey is not to arrive safely at the grave in a well-preserved body, but to skid in sideways shouting, woohoo, what a ride.
All right. Thank you, Rita. So thanks to Rita for starting out and showing us some of the lesser-known powers of the fellowship, along with the empowerment value that we've been hearing about from a number of people. So now we're going to hear from Mike Keefe, who has been the editorial cartoonist for the Denver Post since 1975. Throughout the 1990s, he was a weekly contributor to the USA Today, and a regular on America Online. Nationally syndicated, his cartoons have appeared in all the names you know, such as Time, Newsweek, Businessweek, U.S. News and World Report, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and hundreds of newspapers around the country. He won the Pulitzer Prize in editorial cartooning in 2011, and he was a Knight Fellow in 1987. It says 1987 to 89. Does that mean you were 2 years?
I'll talk about that, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you. In 1978, I came out to Stanford to visit my good friends, Jack and Betsy Cox. Jack was a colleague at the Post. He was a hiking and climbing buddy of mine. and he was out here on a journalism fellowship. I didn't know they gave those things. I was just visiting for fun, and after he showed me around for a few days, I said, Jack, let me get this straight. You know, they're paying you to have this much fun. 10 years later, I applied myself, and I was one of the lucky ones to get a call from Harry Press. Anita and our 2 children, one 9 pounds 3 ounces, and the other 8 pound 10, came out to Palo Alto. Frankly, I'd always felt a little shaky about my my job at the Post because I did not have a background in journalism or politics or art or history or English. I was a math major. And I don't know exactly how that transition happened, except that I did cartoons for the school paper when I was in graduate school. But anyway, I decided to use this opportunity at Stanford to shore up my foundations. And I was inspired and encouraged by some of my colleagues out here. And I gained confidence, and a career goal emerged. I would become a permanent Knight Fellow. I hatched a plan. I reapplied. Unfortunately, Jim and Harry saw through my disguise, the fake beard, the sunglasses, the Brazilian accent, you know, didn't fool them for a minute. So I was forced to return to cartooning at the Denver Post, but I was, like a word that comes up all the time in talking about the Knight Fellowships, I was reinvigorated. So I thought I'd show you a few cartoons that I've done in recent years, and I think I have a slideshow. Here's one on the recently departed 112th Congress. Can't do anything, won't do anything. They will not be missed. This is Gridlock.
Nice.
Inspired by M.C. Escher, yes. Well, maybe it wasn't total gridlock. In God we trust. We reaffirm the national motto, their list of accomplishment. Meanwhile, things were actually getting done in Arizona. They passed a Get Tough immigration law. Step out of the vehicle and place your hands on your head. The threat of terror led to abuses. Thank you. The threat of terror led to abuses under the Bush administration, and I'd hoped that this would change under the present administration. But here's the Bush national security apparatus. This is appalling. There's dust on the lens. It's a brave new world. I watch you. Domestic spying. It followed me home. Can we keep it? Even the private sector is in on the act. We're being Googled. And here's one on social networking. Then and now. And in our business, above the fold and below the fold and after the fold. What's up with city council? Here, check out this investigative tweet. Finally, I've got a few simple caricatures I did for the online version of the Denver Post that I'd like to show.
It's about time to say goodbye to my secure, undisclosed location. I'm going somewhere where I can be greeted as a hero with flowers and candy. I'm going home to the Death Star.
I know I have a reputation as being long-winded, wordy, talkative, garrulous, gushy, possessed of the gift of gab with a tendency to go on and on and on and on. Ranting, rambling, effusive, verbose, blabby, etc., 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 etc. So if I exceed my time limit here, well, you can just cut me off.
Am I ready to step in as leader of the free world? Like a salmon swimming upstream, you bet your frozen patooties I'm ready. Domestic issues? I have 5 kids. 5, count them. And a freezer full of herring chum with labels. So, you tell me, international experience? I have fished international waters and own a passport, although didn't need it when Todd and I accidentally snow machined into Siberia. As for defense, I have been a point guard, and I can drop a charging bull moose between the eyes with a hockey puck. Not to mention Todd here, who is real handy with a harpoon.
Anyway, thank you. I left the Post about 1.5 years ago, but I'm still doing one cartoon a week for syndication, still involved in some animation, and involved in other projects that were inspired by my time here in Stanford. Especially, I had a fun relationship with a Stegner Fellowship program here while I was working on other classes. And I think there are a number of fellows here who had that same experience, and maybe we can talk about more of that later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mike. And I bet a lot of you like that idea of a permanent Knight Fellow. Eh? Maybe we could work on that while we're here. So, and I love the way you can see how the fellowship continues to resonate throughout Mike's work. So next we're going to hear from Christianne González Visvanathan. Visvanathan. I practiced that like 5, 6, 7 times.
Don't worry.
See, I'm not in TV.
It's hard.
Apologies.
It's
not hard. Anyway, she is the founder and executive editor of BrazilNews.com, an online media consulting company that operates in Brazil and also in Silicon Valley. Her company works with UOL, the largest Brazilian internet company, which provides data and tools to improve content. She has been a correspondent for multiple newspapers, an announcer for a weekly television program, and a communications officer in government and corporate settings. She was a Knight Fellow in 2006, 2007. So how did the Knight Fellowship affect you in your career?
Wow, it's not simple for me to say how did it impact my life. It's maybe easier to say what did not change in my life after this fellowship. First, when I came in 2006, I used to live in São Paulo, Brazil. Now I live in San Jose, Silicon Valley. And now I have a different house, new friends, hundreds of colleagues from everywhere in the world, a new way of work, and even a new husband. And all of this, believe you or not, including the new husband, would not have happened if I haven't been a fellow in 2006. Regarding my career, also the impact was huge. When I came here, I used to work for UOL. It's the main internet company in Brazil. Before I used to have to be an editor. And before that, I was a reporter, a correspondent for Folha de São Paulo. It's the New York Times there. So I used to pursue this kind of jobs, and like big companies, I thought I would have a long career as a writer and editor in those companies. I would never have thought about having my own company or running anything or doing anything different from writing and editing. And that's exactly what I do today. I run BrazilNews.com that I opened in 2008, 1 year after my fellowship ended. And I have a small team that works with me in Brazil, and we provide a service of intelligence to UOL. I still work with them, but it's a different relationship now. They are my main client. And we provide the service of intelligence to help them to improve content and to do better coverage. I can explain this later on better because I don't have an elevator pitch to tell you quickly what do I do. But I'm very happy to have been created this new business and to be by my own. And I have the whole world to go for. And now actually I'm facing this challenge of doing the next step, going for the next step. I'm trying to figure out if it makes sense to do it right now because I need to invest in infrastructure and also to hire more people. And hiring people, it scares me a little bit because it's a lot of responsibility. But I do like to, I really want to do that. And I guess none of this would be happen if I haven't come to this wonderful fellowship. Thank you very much, Jim and Dawn, to have picked my application. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah. So I think Chris just gave us one really good example of how so many people's careers have just catapulted into new directions and new responsibilities post-fellowship. And we're about to hear from another person who went in, this time not new directions within the enterprise of news practices, but in shaping journalism itself, and that is Phuong Ly. She is executive director of the Institute for Justice and Journalism, a nonprofit that promotes better coverage of social justice issues. And since joining IJJ last year, she has doubled the organization's budget and also refocused its purpose and its scope. So IJJ, for instance, now includes Gateway California, which is a network to connect journalists with nonprofits that work with immigrants. And this is a project she developed during her fellowship. Another really interesting thing that IJJ did recently involving Knight Fellowship was IJJ worked with 2012 Knight Fellow Claudia Nunez to organize Chicago Migra Hack, where journalists, developers, and community members together explored immigration data. She was a Knight Fellow in 2010-2011. So please tell us, how did the fellowship affect your career in life?
Well, I think the Knight Fellowship was sort of like building a 2.0 version of myself. I think one of the seminal moments during my fellowship was I wrote my husband an email and said, I went to get some free pizza and I met the man who I think is going to change my life this year. And it was always a joke within the fellowship that I never actually paid for meals while I was at Stanford. I was really good at getting the freebies, and so I was in the computer lab and I was thinking, what am I going to do for dinner? And there was this thing that popped up that the D School was having this free pizza night, and so I thought, okay, there's dinner. There was a program also about you were going to meet some professors and sign up for classes next quarter. So I went for the free pizza, and then so I met, and one of the professors there was a robotics professor. Mechanical engineer, the type of person who I thought I would never take a class from because I'm not technically minded. And all the D School classes are about solving a problem. So I asked him, so what problem are we supposed to solve in this class? And I thought it would be like some robotics challenge or something that that I couldn't do. And he said, oh, we're going to solve the problem of you. And it was, you take a problem that you have and you solve it. You internalize this. And and this was something new for me because I never really, being a journalist was a way to not look at myself. It's a way to look at other people's problems. Oh, I can ask other people about their problems. I've never written a personal column. I've never, published anything that had the word I in it because I didn't want to look at myself. And so I thought, well, maybe I should just take this risk, and he just seemed really interesting. So I would go to the first class. And so I went to the first class, and the first thing we did was go around in a circle and touch each other's ears. And at the end of the class, he said, and there were people there because it's a D School class. There are a lot of graduate students, and there are a couple of MBAs. And this guy who is a CEO of a company said, a very serious-looking guy. And Bertie says, you can ask any questions about the class. If you don't come back, it's okay, blah, blah. And he says, is this going to be like this for every class? We never saw him again. But it was an important class because it taught me how to look at myself. And it also, interestingly enough, for somebody with an engineering background, we read a lot of stories like Kurt Vonnegut about how the machines were taking over the world and that tech skills weren't everything. And so it was funny that I came to Stanford, of all places, and learned that I didn't need technical skills. What we talked about in that class was a lot about empathy, and one of the tenets of the D School is interviewing people, which already knew, and then so there were these engineers in our class who just did not know how to interact with people. And right before my fellowship, this was when journalism was really falling apart and everybody was like, oh God, we got to be one-man band, we got to learn all these tech skills. And here I was being told that the skills that you have as a journalist are actually valuable and just as valuable as, learning how to code. And so, and the surprising thing at Stanford, you go to the center of Silicon Valley and you learn that. And that gave me a lot of confidence in myself. The problem that I worked on was, for my internal problem was, like, I picked exercise because I had always been the kid. I was always picked last on the, on the teams, and during middle school PE, I was able to forge my parents' signature, so I sat out most of physical education. And so that was a problem, and it was great. Every week we would meet and we would talk about the problems, and it would be a collaborative effort. I would ask my fellow fellows, what can I do to get myself to exercise more? And that was the experience of collaborating with other people is a very different experience than what I had experienced in newsrooms before, because before it's like you do the work on yourself. If you're the reporter, it's your name on the story. And I was always told if there were like 3 or 4 people, if there was a triple byline, that wasn't really a story because you were working on it with other people, and you wouldn't send it out as your resume and clips. But so I learned how to work with other people, and that it was fun working with other people. I'd always been kind of a loner and didn't want to work with other people, and had bad experiences, and the amount of crushing egos in newsroom is astounding. So that was one thing that I learned, and so it was great because another fellow, Beth Duff Brown, said, okay, I know you're really cheap, so in order to get you to exercise, you have to give me X number of dollars if you don't meet your goal. And of course, I'm not gonna, and I'm not gonna give her any money, so that worked. And at the end, I didn't really meet my goal. I still hated exercising. I just did it because I didn't want to give Beth any money, so I didn't really meet my goal. But it became an ongoing process because, like, after the fellowship ended, I joined a gym because I thought, okay, if I've got to give somebody money, I'm going to go to the gym. Well, not really, because it was boring. And then every month I would get, you would get these Groupons. So I started doing different Groupons, different exercises. I knew every facility within a 5-mile radius of our house, 5 to 10 mile radius, and did Groupons because I was still thinking about this goal. I mean, Bernie had kind of addicted me to the idea of the goal and the idea of iterating. That if you change the way you approach the problem will solve itself someday. And finally, I'm glad to report that I, now have found an exercise that I like, and I'm also willing to pay full price for it because there are no Groupons anymore for it. I guess that example just, the lack of taught me everything in a nutshell over that year about how to solve problems. And I'm continually solving problems in that way of iteration, collaboration, realizing I don't need tech skills, so finding people who have those other types of skills. And when I became executive director of IJJ, it traditionally was, it gave training to journalists, but I've kind of, did some iteration and made it into an incubator for Knight projects, because I found that one of the problems that we have with Knight projects is that if you don't have 501c3 status, it can be really hard to get a way to funnel money through and grant. So with IJJ, we have that. And so I'm working with different Knight Fellows. Claudia Nunez has been great. We did Meager Hack, and the Chicago Meager Hack, which was funded by the MacArthur Foundation, we had 5 different classes of Knight Fellows participating. I mean, Nuno Vargas and Wilson from this year came, and it was like having a Knight Fellowship all over again when we did Meager Hack, because we would joke with each other, and there was also good food. I was in charge of the food, so I made sure, learning from Mary Beth and Robin how to, really do great food. And next week I'm meeting with Umbream, who is an incoming fellow who's working. She's a former civil rights lawyer, so we're going to brainstorm about some ways in which her project can mesh in with IJJ. So. Never turn down free pizza. I guess that's one of the, or never turn down free food. That's one of the lessons of the Knight Fellowship.
Thank you, Phuong. Yeah. So I think that's a very helpful raising to our consciousness, the underlying theme of food, and that ran through everybody's fellowship. I think it's probably safe to guess. And then also the ideas of power and empowerment that we learn in the classes themselves and brought out into the world in a lot of different ways. So I would want to hear your questions, and while you're thinking of them, I have another one I want to ask our panel just briefly to think about or to respond to, and I think it might be a bit of a challenging question. So we hear so much pessimism these days about journalism, especially when things happen like the Chicago Sun-Times lays off its entire photography staff. And I have hope, because in the new configuration, for instance, of the fellowship, there are all kinds of top journalists put to work creating great solutions and possibilities for journalism. And I want to ask our panelists, because I know there is a foundation of optimism in this room, or we wouldn't be here, what is one thing that you are optimistic about regarding journalism and the role of journalism in society? So I'm going to start with you, because I gave you a little prior chance to think about it.
I think that sometimes when people talk to me about journalism, especially from my generation and older than this, I think that we make a mistake, because we are always thinking about working in a newspaper and acting as a reporter or an editor or something like that. Journalism is so much bigger than this, and I just think that, I'm optimistic, because I think that we have to change the way we see that, and we work with that. So if you don't work as a photographer in a newsroom, you can work as a photographer making applications for iPhones, iPads, and things like that. You can always find a way to keep working as a journalist, even if you are not working in a newspaper or for a newspaper or something like that. So I'm optimistic. I know the jobs are not increasing right now, but I guess it's not happening only for journalism. It's happening in other careers too, because we are facing economic crisis everywhere.
Thanks. How about you, Mike?
Well, it's hard to be optimistic, when there's news like what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
When I started as an editorial cartoonist in 1975, there were about 300 working cartoonists on dailies across the country, and today there are, I don't know, 60 or 80 at the most, I'd say. And I just came back from a cartoonist convention where for the past 5 years that's been the topic of conversation. And what happens is, much as you mentioned, many of these people who do what I do have found other outlets. It doesn't always pay as well, but they've found outlets. And I guess what I'm optimistic about is that there's a marketplace for journalism and for ideas and for graphic commentary. There are people who want in-depth stories. I mean, there is a market, and somehow we'll figure out this internet thing, and we will serve that market. And I think it hasn't come yet, but I think that will shake out.
Thanks. Rita.
Well, I think I picked this time to retire at 66 after 41 years because I wasn't that optimistic about where we were going. But then I see little snippets here and there of hope that when I started out in television journalism back in the early 70s, my news director used to say, well, the first station I worked at second station was in San Antonio, and we had a consultant from New York who leaned across my desk, and I was always pushing the time limits because I wanted to do more. And he said, Rita, 1:30 is reserved for the second coming of Christ. And I've never forgotten that. That was just so upsetting to me. But as I learned to keep pushing the limits, and when I worked at KTVU, first at PBS and then at KQED when I first came here, and then at Channel 2, I had a wonderful news director for 15 years who said, you can have as much time to tell that story as you can tell it well. So some of my stories, and we pulled some out as I retired, were over 5 minutes long, a daily story. And they really looked at all different aspects, the perspective, and that was something I learned at Stanford, was to put news in perspective every day, context, which we're great at reporting facts, but not telling the story. Showing the empathy, showing the people, showing the impact, getting different views, and doing this little mini documentary every day sort of thing. So I did that for 15 years. And right before I left, our stories now are back to a minute 30. So we've improved on the second coming of Christ. We have a little more time. But they actually had stopwatches and, sort of graded you. I was past that point, so they kind of knew I was hopeless and they let me alone. And then I look, it's cyclical. That was 41 years ago, folks. A minute 15 was the length of our story. Now they're a minute 30. And we ganache and say how terrible it is. We're doing more investigative work where I work than we ever have before. Now, we don't get as much time. They used to be 5.5 minutes long on the air. Now they're 3.5 minutes. But we're still out there doing the work, and we have more people doing them than before. That's television. There's so much wrong with it. Take a look at this, and we have to hold up props in our stories and, all the garbage kind of stuff. But maybe it makes people watch a little bit more, and maybe they'll get something out of it. I don't know. But right before I came here, I'm still on the mailing list for the station, and we're owned by Cox Communications, which, as you know, owns Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Austin American Statesman, and some other papers, radio stations. And they're turning a huge profit. And some of the things they're doing, I've, fought tooth and nail over the last few years, but they've combined a lot of TV, print, radio, working together. You talk about this collaboration sort of thing of trying to do more joint projects. They've streamlined management into, more of a centralized thing to save money. But they're making lots of money. I just saw their report, and it's privately held company, so you don't see a lot of that. They said they're now the third most profitable communications group in the country. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that was in their thing yesterday that they sent employees. So, and they have new ways to get newspapers more profitable with selling things that they were talking about in there. So it is happening, and they are selling more to people who want more in depth. You can get the quick hits, but then there's more in depth. And I've said for years where we had this fight between print and broadcast that we were sort of the lowly ones on the poor stepchilds, that we should have been working together. I've been arguing that since the early 80s. And now, and Kim Komenich is one of my examples, here's this wonderful, where are you, Kim? I saw you earlier. As a wonderful Pulitzer Prize winning photographer that I would go out with and know and see on the field and respect. When I saw Kim like 15 years ago with a video camera around his neck and all of his great still cameras, and he was trying to do both. But I think print is learning some of storytelling as we have done in television. I think we're merging, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah. So there's some hope. I think time will maybe bring us back around. I don't know.
Thanks. That is encouraging. And part of what gives me courage and encouragement are the people like our last two panelists, Phuong and Peter, who are really pushing and working to move journalism in a better direction. So, Phuong, would you like to take the question? What are you optimistic about?
What gives me optimism about journalism is there are other people optimistic about journalism, not the journalists. Because if you hang around Stanford long enough and you go to the classes, like at the D school as well as the business school, they're all talking about storytelling, how to tell the best stories. And so what the media hasn't realized, or is getting around to realizing, is maybe we should go back to our core business. Storytelling is important. Other people realize that storytelling is important. Let's not get rid of all the storytellers. So I think that as, if you see in Silicon Valley, LinkedIn, Twitter, Amazon, they're all trying to get into the business of storytelling. So I think that if we, look to them as examples, let's not let them take away our franchise. And that if they think that it's important to invest money into their own storytelling apparatus, then maybe there's something in it for the future of journalism.
All right, thanks. Peter, you get the last word on this question.
I've been struggling with this from all the people spoke, because I'm not really sure I do have a lot of optimism, but to the extent that I do, I think it comes from several places. One is, and this word came up earlier, the word courage. I think that one thing we share in this program and learn in this program is you get validated. You get the courage to do what you ought to do within established institutions, and in a profession that has a long and to some extent sclerotic way of doing its business. You get the courage to stand up for the values of the profession. And so I think whatever optimism I have comes in part from that. But I must say that in the new media, there is also one more thing I want to mention is the humanities. That we heard Hennessy talk about the importance of the humanities. It's vital. This is how you think. This is how you learn to think, and not just simply react professionally. And I remember that a seminar that Stuart McBride and I went to at Stanford, in which the professor, Ken Fields, who's a poet, spent the whole, but it was a class on short story. And we spent the whole time talking about something I didn't get it. He was talking about the idea of guilt in Billy Budd, Melville's Billy Budd. And we had studied that months before, and I didn't understand what the hell he was talking about, why we were going back through this old lecture. And then at the end, right near the end of the thing, he spun around and he said, and yesterday, in a courtroom in San Francisco, and he was talking about, this will date my fellowship, the trial of Dan White for killing the mayor and supervisor in San Francisco. And what he did is he applied the American notions of guilt and innocence to something that happened in a courtroom yesterday in San Francisco. Well, we're the people who take those elements of our culture and apply them to what happened yesterday. And so I think it's very important for us to keep alive, and I hope that we can be advocates for it, the values of human rights, of human rights too, but of humanities. And one other thing, so this is a community thing. It's about courage. It's about the courage of standing against institutions with the values that I think are reinforced here. But one final thing, just speaking more traditional terms, a lot of the journalism agenda used to be established by the institutions themselves, which in turn did what they had always done. I mentioned before, they had the police beat, which of course overemphasized certain aspects of our society, and you had the city hall beat, and there were certain places we looked. We didn't have a good way of covering communities of color that were cut off from many of these things or were victimized by those institutions. We didn't have ways of covering the things that weren't institutionalized because we had someone covering a beat. Well, one thing that is a potential for the new media is they're starting to feel pressure from people who don't like the way they're telling the story, who found another vehicle, even if it's only one person with a blog or one person with a tweet, or one person with some other vehicle, those vehicles are now available to more people. And I think they can bring pressure on us to say, think outside this journalism box that you've been in. So to some extent, I think there is hope, and I would hope that anyone still in an institution would recognize ways of opening up to those new vehicles, and I think most of them are starting to realize that. And I think if I have any institutional hope, it's that they'll find ways of responding to the voices that could never have been heard and now have the technological ability to be heard.
Thank you. I knew they'd have some good answers for us. Thank you. So it's about, what I heard was it's about tapping back into the quality of what we know how to do well and connecting it with some of these changes that we're seeing, tying that with community and with courage. So now it's your turn. What are some of your questions?
This is less a question. I'm going to be honest. It's not a question. There's no question mark on the end of this. There's probably an ellipses. If there's anything, but I just want to offer a quick thought, and I promise it'll be quick. And it's an attempt to tie together something that President Hennessy was describing this morning earlier, and a number of the panelists touched on, which is this. We can all agree on the importance of storytelling. We can all agree that the digital revolution has offered both disruption and opportunity, and we might be able to agree that as journalists we have not fully taken advantage of the new ways, the new toys, the techniques that have been offered to us, partly for various reasons. It intrigues me that if you could find a way in a university setting, Stanford, to capitalize on the idea of the matrix where there are different disciplines, different departments coming together with trying to solve a common problem, and applied it to new ways of storytelling. Universities, like a lot of other organizations, aren't terribly good at breaking down silos. They say they are, but they're not. Imagine that, and maybe the Knight program is a way to light this fuse, if the idea has any merit at all, taking different parts of the university, the business school, computer engineering, the law school, the history department, and communications, and trying to build an interdisciplinary, whatever we call it, a startup, a lab, to explore new ways of telling a story, different stories, apply the ethics in the sense of all of the senses that are here, but try and bring in other ways to get them airborne so that no one particular viewpoint is limiting, but you have access to the incredible intellectual capacity of the university, and it creates something that we can't actually, we might be able to have some sense of the outlines, but that's it. And this would maybe take us in a direction that has both a business sense, the compassion and the power of storytelling, and a kind of journalism that is just over the next horizon. ... Thank you.
Thank you.
So what do you think of this? And it kind of is in the same vein as where Jim was. I find myself thinking, what if we all, I mean, think of the power and the talent of the Knight, all the Knight Fellows, put ourselves aimed at a particular goal. What might we accomplish? So why don't we do that?
Does anyone on the panel want to take that on?
Georgie's doing it.
I'll comment on both of them. I think this is a very important idea. The breaking down of silos in every possible way is what we ought to be about. And maybe we have thought of this too much as a journalism program, and not enough as a way of collaborating as the bios and the engineers do, and so forth. And maybe the future of the program is in finding ways of setting up the kind of collaboration with other resources at Stanford. I mean, this is certainly part of the program anyhow, but it's more of an individual basis. I don't really have any details on how this might happen, but I think we are brainstorming at some point, and maybe we can think about that issue of how to make journalism is involved in everything, and each of these things in turn help to shape the world in ways that we haven't even thought about. I mean, who thought about, when they started Google, who thought about privacy or anything else? And if we were in it at an earlier point, if we were talking about some of the issues that have been talked about by Hennessy, among other things, in a really collaborative way, it may be very useful both to journalism and to society. And I don't know how to make that happen. I just think it's a good challenge.
Can
I think,
sorry?
go ahead.
Sorry, maybe I didn't understand your question very well, but I think we are taking journalism to the next step. We are doing different things like gamification. We are figuring out new ways to tell stories and to make the story achieve different publics. So I don't understand when we talk about, I understand the crisis of the jobs, but I don't understand when we think about journalism as something that it's ending. I don't think it's ending. We do need news. So we need people to tell the stories. We need people to work with that. So that's why I think we are really doing something, trying to take journalism to the next step. And many fellows are working on it and trying to figure out new ways to work with journalism and to do better stuff. So I don't think we are just watching the newspapers being closed and that's it.
Well, and Chris, in your own work, very specifically, she's working on helping television do that better, address these problems and through new tools.
Yes, an internet company. And also when I was here already as after 2000, after my fellowship year, I was already here in Silicon Valley, and I got an invitation from a fellow in Brazil that I didn't know, although we are both Brazilians, I didn't know before. He used to work for the same group that I was working, and we didn't meet, we haven't met. And because of the fellowship, he contacted me and he invited me to be a correspondent for Folha again here, and it's a great honor. And even this way, I didn't take this job because I was really willing to do something different and keep working with this service of intelligence that I do believe. It's hard to explain, but I do believe in it, and I like to do what I'm doing now. And it's different, and I'm still a journalist.
Mm-hmm. So very specifically using internet. I know Phuong wanted to
I was just going to say, I'm very excited about the JSK network that Georgie and Andrew Haig have really worked hard this past year to put together, and that can help break down some of these silos, because we have silos between the classes, and some of that is breaking down with the last 3 classes, but as we spend more time at this reunion and at online on the new network, I think that that's going to help. Ideas will bubble up, and lots of people will hopefully start to work together.
Being on selections here and seeing the evolution of this program, as an old-style journalist who's come kicking and screaming into the new world and the new fellowship program here. Maybe we should hear from Don and Jim, and maybe we will later, but for those of us who came before, that I think we've heard from 2 of the more recent people here, they are doing a lot of this interdisciplinary approach. Some of the fellows I've worked with, they have folks in the business school that are helping them with a startup, to modeling, to getting funding, to robotics, to design, to whatever. There is a lot more of this, I think, here on the campus. And I think what the program is trying to do, both with connecting former fellows together, whether it's this new network thing, which I went on and don't see yet, but I'm optimistic. But having these groups and socials that we're doing and that we are connecting more, I think that there is hope there. I sort of like your question about finding a goal and having a more defined approach on an issue, perhaps, that we are yet to define. Everybody's exploring their own ways, but maybe we can do more together on a singular issue where we could put the impact of the Knight Fellows on it and solve something.
It strikes me that's the type of thing that we can do at lunch.
And tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow we're going to be spending at the D School. Yeah.
So do I have time to just give an example? Or?
One quick one, because
Yeah,
we're going to
yeah,
have
right.
okay.
A couple more questions.
Very fast.
He's not a fellow, but he's a friend, a journalist called Luis Cavesan. He's Brazilian. He used to be very famous. He's still famous. And he used to work for Folha de São Paulo too for 30 years, and he was a great guy, an example. And then he got fired because he had a big income and the company could not afford it anymore. So he was a little bit desperate at the beginning, and he was a little bit depressed. And suddenly he started playing with Facebook. He never played with Facebook before, but he had nothing to do, so he was playing on Facebook. And he has very strong opinions about everything. So he was making comments all the time about everything. And people were following him and just saying like. And then suddenly he started having calls. This is true. He's my friend, so I know the story. He started getting calls from clients who want to hire him as a communication strategist. And he has like 5 clients today. He makes much more money than he was making on Folha. And he works like 2-3 hours a day at home with his whiskey. This is a great life. And he is a journalist. He's still a journalist. He's a great journalist.
That
and
can be a retirement.
His opinion is so important. And he's moving. And he's also inspiring a lot of young people who have no idea about politics or anything because they are following the guy on Facebook.
Another example.
So this is a great example.
Yeah.
A pragmatic question about TV news. The only TV news show that we watch consistently is the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. And that's under increasing pressure now, as I understand it, losing sponsors. Do you see that show surviving? And do you see other shows like that, perhaps in a modified version, working for the public?
It's an interesting question. We all know, I think, public broadcasting, where I had roots, has undergone some tremendous financial issues over the last year or so. When I worked at KQED, we were not sure from year to year. We had a Ford Foundation grant whether we'd be refunded year to year, and we had a nightly news program. And actually, our news program at KQED was the forerunner of what was MacNeil-Lehrer. And they took the concept from what we did, and it started before I was there from 1968 of the newspaper strike in San Francisco, which many of you will remember. And the reporters had no avenue for what they were doing, but they still went out on the street and covered their news every day, and they came into KQED and they read their stories. Now, pretty boring stuff. I've looked at some of the old clips and stuff, and cartoons even. They had the cartoons they would put up on the screen, and they would read each little bit of it. So that really, the origin of MacNeil-Lehrer is 1968. Maybe it is time to reformat some things. Now, my husband is a diligent watcher every night. I walk in and sometimes I can't sit there long enough to watch it. Now, I'm still a big consumer of news, but you can do a little bit jazzier production to try to bring in new people. And what we're seeing is most people that are watchers of TV news still are old. They're like us. We are used to watching television for news, the old style news. So we've got to reach the young people like my son, who was brought up in a news household, but he does his all on his phone every morning going to work or going to school. So we have to look at new ways. MacNeil or Lehrer may not still be here in another couple of years, but maybe it's time to come up with something in the next generation, but hopefully still thoughtful and good like that.
can you address the discussion that is going on in newsrooms about 100 words with, can you sort of cross that with the post-Knight Fellowship optimism of sort of how do you take that and bring it back to the newsroom and, you know, give me some advice here.
Thank you. Okay. Peter.
I think too much attention has been paid to the 100 words as the ultimate content. I personally, in my news-consuming post-internet world, find tremendous value in many of the digests that come to me that if they catch my interest, I will click through to the full story. And I haven't time to read all the full stories. But, you know, I subscribe to any number of them from, you know, Salon, Alternet. You know, there's any number of things that you could subscribe to that give you a window into a fuller story. And I think if we put too much emphasis on the content being the tweet, then we are really in trouble, because nuance doesn't come in a tweet. But if we find ways of approaching people in shorter form, with an easy lead on to something larger and more nuanced, then I think we can perhaps satisfy both. And maybe I'm old world and working this way, but that's what I do. And I wonder if it isn't more of a possibility to think in those terms, as the short form being the access to those who want to go to the longer form.
So, yeah, would a couple of you like to comment as well? And thinking about this question maybe in a broader sense as well, like how do we address the latest fad, whether it be 100 words or what have you, that we may feel is compromising the journalism itself. So, Rita, you want to?
Well, I still am trying to stay optimistic here. So if we're going to be up on this, I do see kind of what Peter said as a window, but I also see that we have different audiences at different times of the day. And now that I've been retired a couple months, I got to tell you, there's a lot of repetition out there and on daily stuff. And you can have different ways of doing it. You can have that tweet, you can have that 100 words, but have an avenue for people to go more in depth that are interested in learning more. And I will say that as much as I hated that minute 30 stopwatch on me after unlimited time, I did learn to be a better writer. I was much more concise. I didn't stick stuff in there that was extraneous. And sometimes think about your own work. If you really sharpen it and you have the time to do it, it can be a lot more interesting than it is sometimes when it's longer. Now that's the avenue to get into it. I'm not saying investigative stories have to be 100 words, but shorter, sometimes more people will see it or read it than they will if you have this huge, long, 3-page jump that they're not going to read. But you're reaching more of an audience. I don't know if that's making any sense or not. And thank God we still have investigations out there, and that's where my optimism ceases. I mean, our station, some may do more investigative work, and I know Karen is going to talk about this on Saturday night a little bit more about investigative journalism, but I really fear that that's where we're going to wake up one day and say, look at what our institutions and politicians are doing, and nobody is really checking on them right now. I can't tell you how many officials said they were glad I retired because they could sleep better at night knowing I wouldn't be after them. And I don't see anybody after them.
Yeah.
I mean, and it hurts. It really does. I think, we need to keep up the pace on investigative journalism. But there are a lot of people who are not interested. But if we give them that window, hopefully some will. And if not, those other people are going to rip them off, which I hate the bloggers that rip off the frontline journalists that are out there doing some of the street work and the investigations, and everybody else tweets and writes about their opinions on what they have done. So the information gets out there one way or the other, but I think, to me, the big fear is not having enough investigative
Well, and
journalism.
fortunately, we have some very good investigative startups going. I want to give Mike the last word on this, our visual journalist.
All right. Well,
we have 1 minute. So.
I would like to defend the 100-word or less message, given that I rarely use more than 15. But I also have a picture there too, so that sort of belies my statement. No, I agree with what was said about the need for these short, pithy things to not stand alone completely, but be a link to the more in-depth material that can be found somewhere else, and it's an enticement. It's not the message in itself.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope these conversations will continue. I know they will. So please join me in thanking our panelists.